This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
So we are back, folks. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about finance. We're talking about politics. We are on this show every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. And we have affiliates throughout the country. But, of course, our flagship, the mothership, is WABC. And John Catsimatidis is the one who has given me the privilege to sit in front of this microphone. By the way, it's an amazing thing. We get 5 hours of live programming on WABC on Saturdays, which is unheard of in the radio world. Maybe there's someone else that does this, but I guarantee you most of the shows, if you were to flip your dial and do not do it, are going to be, either canned shows or paid commercials and so on. No, we give you live programming. 5 hours, 3 hours, Larry Kudlow, 2 hours, Steve Moore. It's a privilege for me to follow the great Larry Kudlow, by the way, who was my best man at my wedding. So he's my best friend. So we've been friends for 40 years. Okay. Speaking of friends, I shamelessly brought another one of my friends on the show because Larry always has me on his show. And that is EJ Antoni. He's one of the top economists in the country. He's the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation. He works with me on projects at Unleash Prosperity. EJ, thanks for joining.
Oh, Steve, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I got so much to talk to you about, EJ. And look, I'm going to just be honest. I'm not in a good mood. I'm not in a good mood about what's going on with this economy. I mean, it's painstaking to watch this market fall nearly every day. Now, for the last 3 weeks, we've seen a big sell-off. We're seeing oil back above $100 a barrel. I don't know what's going on. I'm not an expert on the Middle East. I don't know how much longer this is going to take. Now Trump wants $200 billion more for this at a time we're already running a $2 trillion deficit. I mean, when you and I were talking, I had you on about a month ago, and we were talking about how bright the future looked. And, we all hope this is just a short bump in the road, that we end this conflict in the Middle East quickly and victoriously. But what is your overall takeaway from the economy as we stand right now?
Well, Steve, I agree 100%. We were going into this really so incredibly bullish on 2026. But now what's going to happen with oil and natural gas is such a massive wild card. I just don't think there's any way to say for sure anymore. And look, all of these different talking heads out there who are trying to tell folks, I know oil's going to 200 or I know oil's going back down to 70. Please, I beg of you, don't listen to those folks, because the truth of the matter is they don't know. Nobody knows. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 hours in the region, let alone 6 days or 6 weeks. And that's really what. By the way,
AJ, if you and I did know the answer to that question of what the gas price or the oil price is going to be a month or 2 months or 4 months from now, we'd be rich sitting in Tahiti.
That's exactly right. We'd be drinking margaritas and coconut milk or whatever the case may be. And again, the reality is the situation on the ground is incredibly volatile, and so we don't know what's going to happen, and in terms of military situation and the political situation, and that's why we don't know what's going to happen with energy prices. But the reality of the situation, I think, Steve, is this. If the president essentially wraps everything up within the next few days and brings everybody home, gets our military assets out of the region, and Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz, if there's not much more damage done to energy infrastructure, then prices, I think, will come back down relatively quickly and pretty close to where they were before the conflict. Not quite as close.
I agree. And by the way, EJ, I mean, if you look, the one the safest bet you can make is to just look at what the futures price is. That's what the market believes the price will be in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months. And those charts do show you that, they expect in a month for the price to start coming down and actually falling in 6 or 7 months to where they were before this all began. Now, again, those forecasts could be wrong, but that's the best indicator we have.
Right, exactly. That's kind of the collective wisdom of the market, what you're describing, Steve. I think you're absolutely right. So clearly the market is not pricing in something like a multi-year war, but at the same time, if we go back to just a week ago, the market was also not pricing in Israel striking some natural gas fields in Iran, and then Iran striking natural gas fields in the region in retaliation. And that's why then natural gas prices went up. And so this is why we say we just don't know for sure what's going to happen in the conflict and which direction prices are ultimately going to go. Qatar, for example, announced several days ago that because of damage done in those strikes by Iran, I think it'll take between 3 and 5 years for some of their gas fields to get back up to the production that they were at.
Yeah, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. So, right, exactly. I mean, the irony, of course, is that the world really is awash in oil and gas, or at least it was as of 2 months ago. And so it really is. I mean, it just seems to me that it's a short-term issue. But look, I'm a little older than you are. I've lived through these since the 70s. I remember the Iran hostage crisis, and I know a lot of our listeners remember that. And I remember packing my family into when I was a teenager in the 70s, and my parents would pack us in the old station wagon, and we would sit in line for 10 cars in front of us in the Chicago area to get gas in our car. So my point is, we've lived through this. And by the way, the gas price tripled over the 1970s because of the flare-ups in the Middle East. It seems to me, if you look over the last 50 years, every time we have a flare-up, and you've seen these charts, EJ, every time there's a disruption in the supply from the Middle East, for example, after 9/11 or with the wars going on there all the time, every time it happens, the price goes way up.
Exactly, Steve. And now, can you imagine, look, Trump deserves a lot of credit with the whole drill, baby, drill agenda, because we do have a lot of production today, and that's helping minimize the impact here at home. But Steve, can you imagine if we didn't have 4 years of Biden and left-wing governors throttling energy exploration and production? We would have so much excess capacity, whereas right now we don't have a lot of excess capacity. We have a lot of production, but we're basically producing near capacity. If we didn't have the anti-energy policies of the left for 4 years, we would have so much more capacity that when a crisis like today comes around, the U.S. could simply turn around and start exporting energy like crazy and making tons of money on it. But again, unfortunately, because of the mess that Biden left us, which Trump has been reversing, but we're still dealing with some of the effects of Biden policies. Because of all that, we just can't even export, even if we wanted to. We can't export enough to meet the demand from places like Europe or Japan. Japan gets 95% of its oil from the Middle East.
So can you explain, EJ? I get asked this question all the time, and I try to explain it, and I've tried to do that with my listeners, but some are still unconvinced. So the question I get asked all the time is, okay, so we have a lot of oil that we're producing here in the United States. In fact, under Trump in his first year, his first year of his second term, the United States became a net exporter of oil and gas. In other words, we were producing more than we were consuming. And then people don't understand. They keep saying, well, are the oil companies just gouging us because they still have the supply here? So why is our gas price going up at the pump here when it hasn't affected our supply here? Can you explain what's going on with it's a global commodity, right?
Well, exactly. Japan, we just mentioned that they get 95% of their oil from the Middle East. Well, now that spigot has been turned off, what is Japan doing? They're knocking on the door of West Texas and saying, we'd like to buy some oil, please.
Right, exactly.
And so now there's this huge increase in demand for American exported oil. But the other thing that's important to remember, Steve, is that a lot of the oil we get out of the ground, we don't even actually keep it here at home. We send it abroad to refineries that are optimized for that type of oil, what is usually called light sweet crude. A lot of the refineries that we have here in the United States are actually not, they were not optimized. They have not been efficiently set up to handle that oil. Instead, they've been set up to handle oil like what comes out of Venezuela, which is a lot heavier crude, and also from the Middle East, again, typically heavier crudes. And so often a country may have one type of oil, but it actually refines and uses a different type. It really underscores, I think, your point that this is a truly global commodity. And yes, it's true, one refinery, even if it's optimized for a certain type of oil, can handle almost anything else. But then you typically have to add a lot of other products to try to essentially treat the oil to make it easier to refine at that particular location. In other words, it can get really expensive to try to handle other types of oil that you're not optimally set up to handle.
Well, that's a really good point. And, you know, we do have more oil and gas and coal than any other country in the world. We should be using that to the fullest extent possible for both our economic and national security and our safety, so we don't have to be dependent on these countries that are so unreliable in the Middle East. And so we have clean coal. We can use nuclear power. We can use everything. In some cases, we can use green energy. We can use solar and wind. Maybe we can get 10 or 15%. But the idea, EJ, that we were going to move to net zero fossil fuels was one of the most dangerous, idiotic concepts I could possibly imagine. And that's what Joe Biden was trying to force on us when he was president.
Exactly, Steve. And look, we don't have to imagine, what would happen to the United States right now if we had actually kept going. In other words, if we had been at this net zero thing longer, if we had further reduced our reliance on coal, on oil, on natural gas, we don't have to ask what if, because we can actually just look right now, Steve, as you know, at Europe, and we can see those nations like Germany that have been going down this road a lot longer than we have. What's going on there? They're actually, the German government is having to tell their citizens, please stop driving. Please don't turn the lights on unless you have to. Please limit how much you're going to work. If you're a factory, please limit how much machinery you're using. They're begging anybody and everybody to limit their energy usage because they're running out of it. And now they are so desperate for energy that they're having to go knock on the door of the Kremlin and ask Vladimir Putin to please give them more. I mean, this is such a disaster for them.
By the way, the thing your description of what's going on in Germany is absolutely correct. And again, I'm a little older than you and a lot of our listeners, but what you just described is exactly what Jimmy Carter did in his infamous Malaise speech when he said the solution to the energy crisis is in the dead of winter. He told everybody to turn down their thermostats. I mean, it was just so stupid. And yet that was what Germany tried to do as well, and it didn't work so well. We got 3 minutes left. I want to ask you about, I'm a little nervous about $200 billion more for the Defense Department. We already have over $1 trillion military. At least can we get that paid for? Do we have to borrow $200 billion more?
Oh, Steve, this is, I'm sorry. This just feels like maybe betrayal is too strong of a word, but, this administration was making such great progress on cutting government spending. You've highlighted over and over again that we got rid of 10% of the federal workforce in just a year. Yeah. I mean, what great progress. You had DOGE going through and all these government agencies and departments and cutting so much waste and abuse and fraud and corruption. And it just feels like we're throwing all that away now by blowing $200 billion here. I mean, for context, this is more than all the money that we've given to Ukraine over the last, 4 years? So this really is huge. You're going to expand the deficit by almost 10%. And look,
I know that our listeners have very different opinions about this, but my point would be, if the Pentagon really needs $200 billion more, I don't have the knowledge to know whether that's true or not, but let's assume that's correct. then why can't we take $200 billion out of these other government programs to pay for it?
Steve, I support that 100%. Absolutely. I think that idea of yours is great. We look, at the end of the day, we just don't have the money to spend. And again, this is something that we've been saying for years about the Ukraine. When all of these different politicians, especially on the left, but also on the right, wanted to give the Ukraine all this money. And we kept saying, look, we don't have the money to give. We're literally having to borrow the money to give it to somebody else. Why doesn't somebody else just borrow it then, right? And so once again, it doesn't matter if it's the Ukraine or if it's Israel or if it's anybody else. We just don't have the money to spend.
Well, I think that it's a great summary. That's EJ Antoni, by the way, folks. He is the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, works with me at Unleash Prosperity. You see him on Fox News and Fox Business News all of the time. EJ, I still remain optimistic about the second half of the year. In our last 30 seconds, what do you think?
Yeah, Steve, again, if we can get this conflict wrapped up and we can get energy prices stabilized again, we can do that relatively quickly, then there is a lot going for us in the second half of this year, especially with the big, beautiful bill, different provisions of that kicking in, the CapEx boom. So there's still a chance.
Yeah, amen to that. Great note to close on. That's EJ Antoni from the Heritage Foundation, folks. We'll be right back, and later in the show, we will be taking your calls. And please, if you're a new caller into the show, please tell our operator, because we will put you at the front of the line. We want to hear from the ladies. We want to hear the young people. We want to hear from everybody around the country. I want your thoughts about all of this stuff that's going on. As you can tell, I'm a little befuddled myself. I'm praying that this turns out well. I'm pretty confident it will, because I have a great confidence in this president, in Donald J. Trump. The number is 1-800-848-9222. We'll be taking your calls when we get back. This is WABC.
Thanks for listening to More Money with Steve Moore. You can hear More Money with Steve Moore Saturday afternoons at 1. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.